Hi, I'm Lucas Thoreau. I will be talking about the Hasdane people today. Hope you enjoy my little presentation here. So, who are they? They're a culture of people who live along the Great Lakes in Africa. Culture of nomadic hunters and gatherers, isolated through their steadfast traditions of practically hunting and gathering. Their people are endangered and compromising one of the world's most distinct and ancient languages, which is the Hasdane language. The Haz are very ancient and original in their ways. They have changed very little in thousands of years on this earth. The Hadza people intend to stay isolated and the same linguistically, genetically, and culturally. They are distinguished by being the only population in East Africa that continues to rely extensively on hunting and gathering for their subsistence. Genetic studies confirm that the distinctiveness of the Hadza population stretches back thousands of years. How have they stayed isolated? The Hadza people are located along the Great Lakes in Tanzania, Africa, in the bush, and that is really how they have remained isolated. So obviously Africa is a huge place, and Tanzania is a pretty big place too. So over the last over thousands of years, they have really remained kind of isolated into their own area and bush, and they really know this area well because everything they do is on feet, and they study it every day. They study their area every day. The Hadza people don't have to go shop for food. They hunt and farm food using their original ways of life that their ancestors have used. So practically, the Hadza people have been using the same strategies, the same advice from ancestors and from everyone really that's in their culture for a long time, and they use this in their everyday life. Um, They're the only population in East Africa that continue to rely extensively on hunting and gathering for their subsistence. Beliefs and culture. They believe in sharing, minimal politics, and an intimacy to social relations. So obviously, the Hadza people are very isolated, but there's a lot of other tribes that are around their area, and they use these tribes to for other advice on where things are, or to trade items, not really items, but trade food and water, all like just little stuff like that because they don't really have many possessions in the Hasdan culture. Um, Being mobile is an essential part of their culture, both as a way to find food and as a way to peaceably regulate social interactions. So, like I was saying before, being mobile is one of the most important things in the Hasdan culture because all they really do is hunt and gather. So they go on foot during the day. They have certain people that do certain stuff. So during the day, the men generally go on foot and find new areas and study their land and see where animals are spawning and food is growing, that kind of stuff. Um, they believe staying true to their original ways of life is important and the only way to live. Sometimes they will often break apart into groups and reassemble in order to diffuse social tensions. So, obviously, in any social group, there's going to be disagreements. So, their way of kind of breaking apart this social agreements is going off into two or how many ever groups and kind of getting their cool back and then coming back together and talking about what they learned and how they dealt with the situation that they were dealing with. How they live. Hadza typically live in camps of 20 to 40 residents. On any given day, camp members decide where and how they forage by closely observing their country, discussing their observations with one another, and by drawing upon their expert knowledge of the land. They use meat, vegetables, fruit, and honey as their main source of food, which they hunt and gather. So honey is really the most important thing about the Hasdan culture. They have a ton of it. They use it for really everything they eat, and they use it for trade, all that sort of stuff. So how they live is they have little huts, like if you see in this picture here. They have little huts like that they live in. They're made out of simply wood, trees, all that kind of stuff, like branches, and they don't have bricks and they can't really build houses, but they don't really know any better because that's really how they've been living for a long time. They are people free of possessions, rules, and calendars. They live day by day doing the same thing every day. So practically, these Hasdan people, they don't really have many possessions. They have their clothes, they have their pots so they could cook food and boil, but they don't have really anything else. They really make everything that they live with and share it together because that's their way of life. Has the people today, less than 800 people speak the Hasdan language to this day, and the number of fluent speakers are declining. The Hazda people's land is starting to get restricted by modern day agriculture and locations of state parks and buildings. The Hazda are in tough times, but they intend to remain an extremely resilient culture, persisting isolation. The Hazda people live without technology, livestock, and fresh water. Their ways of doing this is by finding the most fresh water they can find and boiling it, and by simply hunting prey and gathering food. So, the Hazda's people they're a very extinct language and extinct people nowadays. Obviously, if you have 800 people speaking your language, there's not a lot of them left here, and it's kind of getting to a point where a lot of these people, a lot of these Hazda people are kind of trying to find new ways of life because they're scared to see what the future brings for them. Like obviously, modern day world is getting to them. Like they're starting to see different buildings getting built, parks getting built on their land and all of that, and that's not good for them. It's kind of, I mean, you could compare it a bit to indigenous peoples of our land in Canada here when they were getting pushed off their land and their ways of life too, and obviously we've kind of had to adjust to that, and they have kind of had to adjust to that, and that's just how I mean modern day works. And obviously with technology, the Hazda people have no clue what technology is. They don't know what an iPhone is, and they don't really know about it, so they don't like they have no clue about it, so they don't have to use it or know how to use it because they stay true to their lifestyle, and that's all they really know is what their ancestors have taught them. The Hazda people are very endangered today. They have no written languages or rules. The number of Hasdanians are declining, but they are a very strong culture and have lasted a long time doing what they do. So yeah, practically the Hazdian people they don't have a written language or rules. Their rules and written language are passed down from their elders, etc. And that's really all they know is they know that they have to hunt and gather to stay alive. They have to stick together. They have to know how to run on foot. They have to know how to gather honey because that's their main resource. And they don't even live by calendars. They don't know what day it is. They live every day doing the same thing. Their land has been decreased significantly in the last 60 years because of modern day building, agriculture, and other tribes and people invading their land. Like as I said before, that's just how I mean modern day. That's just modern day situation. Is just things are getting built, things are getting expanded, and other tribes are starting to invade their privacy a bit because their land is getting so small, and people are starting to figure out who they are and where they are, and this is really not good for their culture because their main thing is about staying isolated in their ways to their life. Some of them have moved close to villages and taken jobs because of what has been happening to their culture, and this affects the population of the Hazda people greatly. So, yeah, like I was kind of saying before, is a lot of these Hazdan people are seeing that people with jobs and stuff are kind of more successful and they live a bit of an easier life, and how their population is going down so much that this is what they really have to do to stay alive, and that really affects the culture greatly because if they're all staying together, then they would remain a bigger population and continue to have more Hasdan people living. Um, the Hazda culture isn't the only culture that this invasion of peoples and modern day ideology is affecting. There are many more cultures around the world that are dealing with the same thing and have already dealt with. So in conclusion, really, the Hazda people have lasted a lot longer than a lot of cultures, obviously, but there are a lot more like them around the world that are in their situation when they have a lot of people kind of leaving their culture, leaving their tribes, and that kind of causes like a ruckus inside of their tribes and how they deal with things. So an example of that would be like indigenous cultures in Canada and how they're pushed off they're pushed off the land here in Canada. And this was a long time ago though, so I mean that didn't last very long compared to Hazda people, but in a way, modern day world and the invasion of peoples and ideology is kind of messing with their culture and ways of life, which is a serious issue for indigenous cultures around the world. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.